Lamb chops, very nice, very simple, fabulous for grilling. But how do you make them tasty? Well, firstly what I do is I make a paste with my Knorr lamb stock cubes. And then I grill them, just spread it on, grill them, paint them with the mustard, dip them in the chives, on the platter, a little splash of olive oil, a little splash of shallots, some parsley. Very simple, dinner in 5 minutes. So, Knorr lamb stock cube, little olive oil, just dissolve the stock cube into the oil to make a fine paste. The great thing about paste, it seasons evenly. It doesn't fall off when you're cooking. It doesn't wash off. Seasoning the lamb with the paste, what it does do, it intensifies the flavour of the lamb. A little olive oil. As you can see, I'm using a griddle pan, fat side down to begin with, and I bring the heat into the meat very slowly, so it starts to render the fat. If it was really hot, the chances of burning the fat before it's rendered is very high. The fat's rendering, so the fat's cooked, but the lamb itself is not cooked. As you can see, I've taken the grill off, so just continue to render slowly. See, when people cook lamb chops, a lot of the time, you get a nice eye of meat which is pink, but the fat's uncooked. So they're not very pleasant. You tend to eat just the eyes of meat and leave the rest. As I've always said, perfection is lots of little things done well. Now at the start of the chops. So now I've rendered the fat. It's caramelised, it's crispy, it's cooked. I can now start to cook the meat. So my whole chop is edible. There's nothing unpleasant about it. With the lamb chop, what's important to me is that the fat's crispy. It's like a barbecue. How many times do you get your lamb chops? They're overcooked, but the fat's delicious. It's about eating. As you can see, I'm rotating the tray so that the heat is as even as possible. You can see I've turned my gas ring off and they're continuing to cook very nicely. Dijon mustard, which is very mild. It's your choice how much you put on. Depends how much you like mustard. Then dip the mustard side down into the chives. Sprinkle some raw shallots and some parsley. Sometimes New Zealand lamb can be quite tasteless because it's very young. So the paste really intensifies it, brings out the flavour. When I was a boy many years ago, one of the most common dishes on menus, and one of the most popular with the customers, was a beef stroganoff. It should take between 5 to 10 minutes depending on the size of your meat and secondly, the quantities that you're making. What is it? Butter, onions, paprika, buttered mushrooms, tomato puree, olive oil, fillet of beef, sour cream, Knorr beef stock pot, okay, lemon juice and parsley. A little butter. So in this pan I'll make my sauce and this I'll cook my beef. In with the onions, little paprika. When you cook paprika you have to be very careful because a lot of people what they tend to do is season their beef with the paprika and when they fry their beef they tend to burn it. Cook it very gently with your onions. You'll get a much better result. We take our mushrooms. As you can see, the mushrooms that I'm using are very small and very white. Very important. If you go for large brown mushrooms, it tends to stain your sauce. In the pan with the onions and the paprika, in with the beef. The best cut of meat to use, in my opinion, is fillet steak, every time. But if you can't get fillet, then use rump or use sirloin. Just sweat down your mushrooms with the onions and the paprika and you can see that the mushrooms are starting to be stained by the paprika which gives it that very attractive colour. Add the tomato puree. So you can see that I don't shake the pan, I move the meat. By shaking the pan, you lose heat. And you know, this way you can see the caramelisation in your meat. Lots of people cut it into strips, so therefore you don't get that caramelisation. I like a big chunk of my fillet steak, so I get that nice caramelisation, but my meat's pink inside. Then we add our sour cream into the colander with our meat. Two things. One, releases the fat, which has been cooked in, and secondly, it starts to rest the meat. Allow the juices to drip out. And add 1 Knorr beef stock pot. The stock pot, as you can see, is used as a seasoning. but it also gives it great body, and it gives it that beefiness which you want. And then we finish with a little lemon. As you can see, my meat's rested, it's still hot. Add your beef. And there you have it, beef stroganoff in 10 minutes from start to finish. I would recommend that you serve it with rice, which is traditional and classical, or with ribbons of pasta. And to finish, a little parsley. And there's our beef stroganoff. And what the Knorr beef stock pot does is gives it that real depth of flavour, it gives it real body, which makes a massive difference. Shepherd's pie, if we're really honest with ourselves, it's one of the nation's favourite dishes. And it's very simple. Garlic, onions, fried off. Lamb mince, Worcester sauce, little flour, water. And the secret ingredient, as always, is a Knorr beef stock pot. Little oil, chopped onion, again, garlic, it's optional. As always, cook your onions to remove the water content, to remove the acidity, to allow the natural sweetness. A little colour with the shepherd's pie. Lamb beef stock pot, it works fantastically well. And if you're making a cottage pie, exactly the same method, exactly the same recipe, no difference. Add the lamb and then break it up and mix it in with the onion. As you can see, the water content of the lamb is starting to release. What you have to do is continue to cook so that water evaporates. By doing that, it intensifies the flavour of the lamb again. And once the water's evaporated, then we can singe the lamb and then proceed into stage 2 with the Worcester sauce, etc. My lamb's now been cooking with the onions and the garlic for approx 10 minutes. But you can hear this crackling now. That's because the water is almost gone. Once that happens, then I can start to singe my meat. That little bit of fat content which is still in the lamb will now render, caramelise. And that's how I'm building my flavour. Lots of people don't go to this extreme, not because they're lazy, they just don't know. And so if you've got the time, then spend that extra 10-15 minutes evaporating the water and working your lamb. So there's no big lumps in there. How many times do you have a shepherd's pie with big balls of mince all glued together? That's because it hasn't been worked properly, it hasn't been cooked properly. We just add a little bit of flour just for body and texture. About 10 grams per half kilo. Worcester sauce, again to taste. Little tomato puree, beef stock pot, and then water, approx half a litre. So as you can see, we're building all the layers of flavour that are required for a great shepherd's pie. And a little sprig of thyme. Now we cook that slowly for about an hour. When you're making something like shepherd's pie, there's no real recipe. It's more method than recipe. So, you allow your palate to dictate. If you don't like Worcester sauce, leave it out. If you don't like tomato puree, leave it out. In my opinion, most people make their shepherd's pie too dry. I like my shepherd's pie quite wet, but still with texture. So when it's put onto my plate, it collapses, but it still holds together, rather than it being a solid block. But again, everyone to their own. So our shepherd's pie mix has now been braising slowly on top of the stove for 1 hour. As you can see, there's a nice richness, and also it's not too dry, it's not too wet. So what we do now is we just spoon this into our dish. So then sprinkle my carrots and my diced swede, which has been cooked already. Some people sprinkle peas with their shepherd's pie. I prefer to root veg and peas on the side. And so now I'll allow this to chill and to set, which will enable me to put my potato on top. So as you can see, the shepherd's pie is now set. I have 1 kilo of mashed potatoes. Just very simply spread your mash. There's nothing worse, a friend once told me, when you run out of mashed potato. So there's our basic. As you can see, I've spread the mash over my pie dish evenly, and I've created a nice seal. For presentation, dip your knife into the water so it just rides across the mash. Pop in an oven, which is very hot, for about 20 to 30 minutes. So there we have it, our shepherd's pie, 30 minutes in the oven, beautifully moist inside, not too wet, not too dry, And then we have this nice crispy topping, quite fluffy underneath. Spaghetti, pomodoro sauce, meatballs. Very simple, everybody loves it. Tomato sauce, which you saw me make in an earlier recipe. The water's boiling with a bit of olive oil in there. Vegetable stock pot in there. And we're going to shallow fry the meatballs in olive oil. So, as you can see, there's our mince. 500 grams of mince, 1 egg, 1 slice of bread, soaked in milk. Squeeze the milk out. What the bread does is make them lighter. Otherwise, it's going to be too heavy. That goes there. And about 2 cloves of crushed garlic. And we'll season with aromat, which I think is better than salt, but that's just my opinion. And you'll know when it's ready because it comes together like a paste. You can feel it. Mix everything in well. So I'm just pounding it in. You could put parsley in if you wish to, but don't think it's necessary. So you can see the meat has now come together. All the ingredients have been mixed in well. So now, some flour. Make meatballs about so large. You can make them smaller, you can make them bigger. So you make them as big as you wish. It's always advisable to make your meatball mix a few hours in advance. It just gives time for it to set and for the garlic to infuse. Meatballs, you know, children love them. It's a way of getting children to eat beef when they're very young. So 500 grams of mince would make about 24 meatballs that size. Just flour and reshape the meatballs. And just get off the excess flour. Just cup them in your hand and just reshape them. Okay. We'll flavour our sauce with some basil. If you don't want to use meatballs, you could always do tomato sauce with basil and mozzarella, which is called Sorrentina, which is a nice vegetarian dish. Okay. Pomodoro sauce is a great basic in Italian cooking. So for example, say you were making a lobster spaghetti, your base would be pomodoro sauce. Lobster stock with it, parsley. Say you're going to do a seafood pasta, it's good to have your base as a tomato sauce. Always very important. Right, now what we do is we cook our meatballs. Firstly, we'll cook them until they're brown. They won't be 100% cooked, and then we finish them in the hot tomato sauce, and then at the last bit we throw in the basil before we mix it in with the pasta. So now what we can do is we can put some pasta in. So in the water we've got stock pot, we have olive oil, and we'll cook that now for 10 minutes. A minute less than what's recommended on the packet, because remember, when you take it off and put it into your colander, it's still cooking. By the time you put it into your sauce, it's still cooking. So the 11th minute should be being drained and back into the sauce. My favourite way of eating pasta is al burro, just with butter. I like to taste my pasta, and I think that stock pot does a better job than just seasoning it with salt. But that's my preference. And I've used Knorr stock cubes for years. And what I try to do is coordinate everything. I think that's one of the keys of cooking at home, is to coordinate things. By putting my meatballs in, I know then they're cooking, and I've now got 10-12 minutes for the pasta, get the tomato sauce up to heat, pick my basil, and so my dish all comes together at the end. So as you can see now, let's pomodoro there. Add the meatballs to the pomodoro to finish off the cooking. So there's our meatballs now. So push that to there. Two minutes away on the pasta. We've got our meatballs in the tomato sauce, cooking away. In about 1.5 minutes, we'll take the pasta off, drain it, throw in the basil, and then everything comes together at the same time. See? So now let's take our basil. So just infuse the pomodoro. Okay, I'm going to drain the pasta, drain off the water. Bit of olive oil. There's our pasta. Now take the meatballs. When you think that was less than what was advertised on the packet. But having said that, I am half Italian. It's not the most difficult dish in the world. Why buy them when you can make them? And then just to finish off at the end, some basil. And there we have it, very simply. Spaghetti, pomodoro sauce with meatballs. And to be quite honest, ever since I was a boy, it's been one of my favourite dinners. Ratatouille is one of those great dishes from the south of France. Very Provençal, fantastic with roast lamb, with grilled fish like sea bass and red mullet, whitefish even, or even served cold as a salad. Delicious. Once you've done the chopping, it'll take about 10 minutes. And how do you make it? We have our tomato sauce, diced aubergines, diced peppers, red and green, and diced courgettes. And then we season with Knorr aromat. It's as simple as that. No need for onions, no need for garlic. They're in our sauce. Most people, they stew their ratatouille. It's quite mushy, it's quite chunky. This is a much nicer way of doing it. Just take that bit of extra time, dicing it quite small. Olive oil. You may think a lot of olive oil. Maybe there is. But once we've cooked it, we pass it off, and we can use the olive oil for something else another day. So never waste. So you can see the olive oil is really hot. So we take our aubergines, and we take our courgettes. Knorr aromat for the seasoning instead of salt. Once you get used to using Knorr aromat instead of salt, you will see the difference. When you think of ratatouilles you've had in the past, they're quite stewed because they throw it in, they put the tomatoes on top, etc., and they just leave it to cook away. It's a dish which should cook very quickly. You can see the way I make my ratatouille. Aubergines and courgettes together. When they're cooked, we'll drain them. The oil then will go back in the pan, and then we'll cook our peppers. And when that's cooked, they will be drained. And then we bring the dish together and we infuse it with fresh basil at the end. So as you can see, our courgettes are still beautifully green, and they've got that little bit of texture. They're not stewed. Strain to remove the oil. Oil back in the pan. We add our red peppers. We add some green peppers. Season your peppers with the aromat. When it comes to seasoning, you have to season everything. You can't allow something else to compensate. When we make our tomato sauce, we season with the stock pots. And then when it comes to cooking the courgettes, the aubergines and the peppers, again we must season. Because if we don't, then our dish will become under-seasoned. So a little aromat to replace salt. Now they're cooked, again drain. So what we do now, we take a couple of spoons of our tomato sauce into the pan just to make it a little bit denser than it was. In with some fresh basil, you can chop it or you can tear it, your choice. Just give it that flavour of Provence, a little fresh thyme. So as you can see, what we're doing is concentrating our flavours. In with the peppers. If you think of what we're trying to do, we're just binding the aubergines, the courgettes, the peppers with the tomato sauce. It should never be sloppy. There's our ratatouille with fresh basil. So what you have is, you have your courgettes, your aubergines, your red peppers, your green peppers, bound with the tomato sauce, which has just been made that little bit denser. When you think of most ratatouilles, they're quite sloppy. They shouldn't be. So as you can see, it's all combined and now ready to be served. As I said, fantastic with roast lamb, fantastic with grilled fish. If you want it as a salad, it's fantastic cold. The dish I'm going to cook for you now is braised beef in prune juice and Guinness. So we have our brisket, we have our Norwich beef, onions, garlic, and to garnish we have the prunes and the bacon. So we take our onions and just roughly chop. Take a couple of garlics, just slice quite coarsely. Let's not forget they're going to break down in the cooking. 4 hours is a long time in the oven. Dash of oil in the pan, add your onions and garlic. Take your brisket. When I braise, I like to braise in large chunks, less shrinkage. And you know, there's something rather nice about having a big chunk of meat on your plate, which has been braised beautifully. Just break it up. And when you're caramelising your beef, it's always nice to have a cast iron pan, a thick base frying pan. It helps with caramelisation. I have a kilo of brisket of beef. Just put them in my pan. And so while we're caramelising the onions and the garlic, we do the same with the beef. Brisket is a very good meat to braise. It really is, but I think the problem people have with braising is they have little small cuts of meat. Very hard to caramelise, and it tends to break down. What you want to see is those large chunks of beef, so it's a real proper stew. Okay, add your beef, the fried onions. Now, 1 bottle of Guinness to begin with, and about equal quantities of prune juice. Approx 330 ml Guinness, and approx 350 prune juice. And then 1 Norwich beef stock pot. Beef in Guinness is nothing new. People have been doing it for many, many years. And so, as I've always said, we live in a world of refinement, not invention. But what the prune juice does, it just gives it that nice balance. Because for me personally, beef in Guinness is just that little bit too strong. And by adding the rich beef, it gives it that great richness of flavour, which is needed in a stew, if we're honest. And so as you can see now, before we've even started the real cooking in the oven, you can see the richness within it. And so its key is the stock pot, but by bringing things in around it, putting it all together, it becomes a very delicious dinner cooked properly. So now this is ready to go in the oven. 140, 150, for approx 3.5 to 4 hours. The beef has been braising for approximately 4 hours, just short. So by the time our beef is ready, the garnish will be complete. So we have 2 frying pans, one for the prunes, one for the bacon, a little clarified butter. If you don't have any butter, then use sunflower oil, it's simple. I like to cook my bacon quite chunky for my lardons, because it's quite a chunky dish is the beef stew. If it was something a little finer, then I'd cut them smaller. But I think you've got to take into consideration the size of those pieces of meat, and also these are going to shrink down. In with your prunes. The prunes were put into cold water, brought to the boil and cooked for 5 minutes. Refreshed and drained. 5 minutes before we're serving it, just in a little butter. Same with the bacon. Cut into chunks, cold water, bring to the boil, drain it, fry it. And there's our beef, which has now been cooking for 4 hours. As you can see, that combination of prune juice, Guinness and rich beef together creates the richest of stocks. And then what we do, again then sprinkle your prunes on, and then add our bacon. One thing I've never understood is meanness with garnish. And there we have our braised beef in Guinness with prunes and with bacon. Spaghetti carbonara. It's got to be one of the favourites. It's very simple, very quick. Start to finish, 10 minutes. Crispy bacon, parmesan, eggs, cream, boiling water. The Cecco pasta, in my opinion, is the best commercial pasta. Stock pots. This time, we're not going to season the sauce, we're just going to season the water for the pasta, because there's enough salt with the bacon and the parmesan. And we season the water with Knorr chicken stock pot. You may ask, why do I season my water with chicken stock pot and not salt? The reason why is because Knorr chicken stock pot makes your pasta taste better than salt. You should try it. Don't throw away the water, we keep the water. Because what have we made? We made stock with starch. Starch from the pasta. So it has flavour. So tomorrow when we're making our stew, we can use this water. If we're making a soup, we use this water. Don't pour it down the sink. Little splash of olive oil. Some people would say not necessary. But having said that, I did have an Italian mother. I'm only going to make 2-3 portions. But look at the size of my pan. Look at the amount of water. So my pasta cooks evenly and doesn't stick together. So we take our egg yolks and we add some cream. Again, you make your carbonara as rich as you wish. If you like cream, a little bit more. If you don't like cream, a little bit less. It's your choice. There's no real recipe. And that's the sauce. Let's not forget, the eggs and the cream, they cook with the heat of the pasta. Some people don't put cream with carbonara, but in England, in America, we tend to. But everyone's different. I just keep it very simple. Whether it's traditional, my method, who knows? But what's important, does it taste delicious? So you can see our water's come to the boil. We take our pasta. And that should take about 8 minutes to cook. When you read the back of a spaghetti packet and it says 10 minutes, make it 9 minutes. If it says 8.5, make it 7.5. Why? Because by the time you've drained it, by the time you've mixed it with your sauce, it's had that extra minute. Otherwise your pasta, if you read the back of the packet, will be overcooked. So we drain our pasta. A lot of the time when you have carbonara, it's curdled. So you've got to really think about what you're doing. You don't want to scramble your eggs. Minuscule amount of olive oil. Again, that's optional. Take our eggs and our cream. Again, you make it as creamy as you like it. Take some of the bacon, just toss that in. I never mix my parmesan with my eggs because it makes it rather sticky. So what I do is, as you can see, a bit of parmesan at the bottom of my dish. I slide in my carbonara, a little bit more bacon so I've got that nice texture, so it's not soggy bacon, it's crispy bacon. Take a little bit more parmesan, and then I serve parmesan with it. So I have parmesan on the table. So if someone wants a little bit more cheese, then that's fine. A little black pepper. As you can see, I don't mix my bacon and my parmesan with my cream and my egg yolks. I build it in layers. So therefore, my bacon is still crispy. It's got texture. I can taste the cream and egg mixture. I can taste my parmesan. It just doesn't become one big flavour. And there we have our spaghetti carbonara. The world of gastronomy, majority of the time, is very serious. But every so often, it can have its elements of fun. And the dish I'm going to do next is just a little bit of fun. It's very simple. It's not 3 stars Michelin. But is it delicious? Is it naughty? Do you want to eat it? Yes. Mushrooms, mature Gruyere, and garlic butter. And who doesn't like garlic butter? Apart from people who don't like garlic. So, let's get our pan on the stove. A little oil. So, take your King George oyster mushrooms and cut them into big chunks. Always remember and take into consideration shrinkage. Okay. So we like to cook mushrooms twice. The first time to remove the water, the second time to cook them and to inject that flavour into them. Okay. So let's take our mushrooms. The first time in the pan, and the second in the oven. Little seasoning. Okay, there's our mushrooms. So, the big one or the small one? That's my decision. I'll go the small one. Right. The idea of this came from a docket spike. And for many years of my life in the kitchen, I used one to put my tickets on. And then one day, it was stuffed to the top. It looked like a tree. There you are. So you just build it up, build it up. Just let them hang. Right. And a little bit of cheese. So just that. Crispy onions. Cheese and onion is one of those great magical combinations. It's just fun as a centerpiece. Bit more cheese. You don't want too much cheese. Just tuck that underneath so it melts. Onion. Cheese. It's just a fun construction, but delicious to eat. There we are, just bring that in. And allow it to all melt into one. Bring your trim. And then a little more salt. So think of all those flavors: mushrooms, cheese, garlic butter, crispy onions. And there we are. Just to melt there. Time for the oven. And now all we have to do is pop it into the oven, 120 for 20 minutes. You watch how it comes out. Time to dress the most magical Christmas tree. Garlic butter, herbs, a dribble of oil, crystal salt, mignonette of pepper. You watch. And there we have it, our mushroom Christmas tree, served with toast and finished with a bit of garlic butter. There we are. And just a little garlic butter. You think of all those things we love: crispy fried onions, melted cheese, mushrooms. And to finish it, a little fresh herb. There we are. And the way to serve it is just pull it with your fork. Be generous with the herbs. A tiny bit of olive oil. Just that cascade. There we are. And a little crystals. And there we have it, our Christmas tree. With vegetarian hard cheese, crispy onions, garlic butter. Bingo. On the 20th of March, Napoleon Bonaparte declared himself Emperor of France. Many years later, on the same date, the 20th of March 1978, I started my career as an apprentice chef at the Hotel St. George in Harrogate. My position was in the larder. Every morning, I was in charge of making the buffet for the hotel guests. The new potatoes from the night before were turned into a potato salad. The French beans were turned into a salad niçoise. And the ratatouille was served cold, no wastage. And then the only thing we really made, apart from the obvious, used to make piperade. It wasn't a great piperade. It was too wet. It didn't have the intensity of flavour. It didn't have the texture which is required. So what I'm going to do next is give you a little insight into how I make piperade, not like the Hotel St. George all those years ago. So we'll start with the concasse. So we take our petals. They have to be perfect because they're going to break down. And then the peppers. We puncture them and then we deep fry them until they start to blister. Then we place them in a bowl, cover with cling film and allow them to cook in their own steam. And when they're cooled, we skin them and then we julienne them. It's that simple. So with the red pepper, we open her. Take away this, remove the seeds. We quarter her, and then we remove the ribs, but we don't throw them away. Little tip there. The skins, we peel them, but keep them. When possible, do not throw anything away. Because the importance of these skins and those ribs, what we do with them, we put them in the blitzer with a little bit of tomato puree, the skins of the tomatoes and the insides of the tomatoes, a little bit of olive oil, and we blitz it. And then we pass it through a very fine chinois and make a fresh passata. And the difference the passata makes to the piperade is extraordinary. Without it, it's not the same. So that little bit of waste which normally ends in a bin, ends in the piperade. So we take the peppers, and all we do with them is just julienne them. As you can see, just run the knife through them. They don't have to be perfect, because nothing is perfect. When I slice them, they're slightly different. So accept imperfection. And through accepting imperfection, you'll create perfection. So there's our peppers. So we take the onion, take the core. As you can see, I'm chopping the onion rather finely. No need to look if you know where the blade is. Okay, take a little garlic. We could be professional and take the core out. But I'm a home cook now, not a professional cook. Okay, so now we're ready. The peppers, which have been fried, steamed, skinned, sliced. The onion, sliced super fine. The garlic, sliced super fine. Concasse of tomatoes, thyme, bay leaf. And then we have the fresh passata. So now It's time to make the piperade. Olive oil, onions, garlic. Work them across the base of the pan. Why? So the water evaporates quicker. And by cooking something quick, you retain freshness. You retain that natural sweetness of the onion rather than being boiled in its own juices. I've said many times before to question. Process your thoughts and give yourself the answer, the correct answer. Okay, at the time, add the bay leaf. Continue to work. As you can see, the water content is gone. And I can also tell by the smell. So now we add the tomato concasse. And once again, work it across the pan so it evaporates quicker, so you retain freshness. So what you can see now is happening, the tomatoes are releasing their water. They're starting to break down. You've got to take it that little bit further to create that concentrate of fresh tomatoes. So now, just pull your spatula across. Can you see it's starting to bleed out very slowly, so it's almost there, it's sort of 98% there. You just work it. So pull your spatula through, and you can see the water is minimal. It's olive oil which is seeping out. It's ready. So now we add the red peppers. And add the fresh passata which we made. There we are. And the working of the peppers, the speed of the cooking, retains that freshness. And that's what it's all about, whether you're making an imam bayoldi, whether you're making a ratatouille, whether you're making a piperade. It's about the speed. It's not about a slow braise, because it all stains and dies. What you want is that freshness. You want those sunshine flavours of Provence. So now, we've only got two things left to do. One is to season, and two is to cook it down to the perfect texture. And we season with a little bit of paprika, a little salt. So just work it slowly and allow it to cook down. I've told you about time. Time in the kitchen is only a guideline, but sometimes it's worth investing a bit of time in the right place and not the wrong place. It's like when you make pasta. Why don't I make my own spaghetti? Because I've got the machinery to make it. And secondly, they're more consistent than I am. And life in the kitchen is all about consistency. It's about focus. It's about discipline. It's about punctuality. If you're late, you'll always be late. If you can't focus, you'll be inconsistent. If you can't stay disciplined, you'll deliver inconsistency again. The key to survival in those 3-star restaurants is punctuality, discipline, focus, which all equal inconsistency. And that's what 3 stars is all about, consistency. So keep on working. So you can see now when I pull my spatula through, it's not flooding the same way. Can you see? It's just slowly oozing out. So I'll go a little bit further. It's almost there. What it needs is just a little bit more seasoning. Not much more, because we have to take into consideration the reduction. It's almost perfect. We're talking seconds away, where it's still wet and moist, but it has texture, it has density, and it's not going to bleed across the plate. You just look. And there we have it, perfection. Now, we must be generous with the oil in the pan, but look at the thickness of the salmon steaks. So it speeds up the cooking. If there's not enough oil in the pan, then what happens is it starts to dry. There we are. Right. In the pan, olive oil. When you go to Spain and you watch them cook fish, they shallow fry it. But look how well they cook fish. Very few people in this world cook fish as well as the Spanish. Season. In with the salmon. Season the top side. So we warm the piperade gently. The last thing we want to do is warm it on an aggressive heat. It sort of dries it. So just gently bring the heat in. Okay. You may ask why I moved the pan. The reason why, the bullseye is always the hottest. It's cooler here. So by moving the pan, the fish cooks evenly. So let's take our basil, which once again works amazingly well with salmon, and the piperade. Let's just listen to the pan. Just line them up and then just slice. Don't bruise herbs. Just let the knife do the work. Okay. And look at basil as a salad rather than a herb in this dish. Okay. Okay. In with the piperade. Once again, service is family style. Little olive oil, lemon juice, crystal salt, just dress with the tiniest amount of basil, and there we have it. Salmon with piperade, oil, lemon, little crystal salt, and just a little fresh basil to wash the palate. Well, firstly what I do is I make a paste with my Knorr lamb stock cubes.